What's going on, everybody? I'm Patrick from POWLAX, and this video is an excerpt from the two-man game video. And in this section, we're talking about how to defend all of these two-man games. Before we get started, make sure to check out patreon.com/POWLAX, where you can download and print the playbook PDF that accompanies this and over 50 other POWLAX videos by becoming a patron and supporting this channel. The goal for this channel is to put out free, in-depth lacrosse coaching content for coaches and players to access anytime, anywhere. So now that we've gone over all of the decision making from the offensive end, we're going to talk about how we want the on-ball defenseman as well as the off-ball defenseman to play these two-man games. And so the first thing we have to cover is everything that's outside of the pick, and we're going to do that with these two defensemen here. And the main thing I will say about defending these picks is that defending picks should be an aspect of your overall defensive strategy. It doesn't make sense to alter what you do on defense simply for the purpose of defending picks. So if you're a team that understands zones, you may be able to run sides. If you're a near man defense, that's how you would want to play these two-man games. You don't want to throw in something special and new just because you're defending picks or two-man games. The first two-man game we're going to cover is a simple mirror. So if M2 dodges down the alley, the basic idea is that if the on-ball player gets beat, we're going to have to slide and then send our recovery if we are using that style of defense. Now, when this happens, we are playing right into the hands of what the offense wants, because if they are using a mirror, they have evaluated a matchup that they want because they think that they can win it. So the key is that you have your backside rotation there ready, because if they like the matchup and they're going to use it, odds are it's probably a good matchup and you're going to have to slide anyway. And even though you are sliding, as long as you have your backside rotations in place, you should be good to go. In our first example, we get a matchup dodge down the left side alley. This draws the slide from the mirroring player, a quick throwback and a defensive rotation that allows all of the defensive players to rematch up. In our second example, we get the same mirror idea with a matchup on the left wing. As the dodge goes, the slide moves quickly, and the original player who was on ball has to bump all the way back through the defense to find his new matchup, because no one's willing to bump because they have to maintain their matchups. And apparently Rutgers' scouting report against Penn State said we should always dodge against number 4 because they quickly find another matchup with number 4 and dodge again. Our final example is a little bit less common, but it shows how, depending on your scouting report, you can slide from different areas based on what you specifically would like to do for a game. As this player dodges from top center, notice that the defenseman guarding the mirroring player points behind him to clarify that the slide will be coming from behind him, not from him. Now, as this player dodges down the left side alley, notice that the slide comes from deeper within the defense with the same quick bump through recovery. And because we're here and I have to point it out, notice this player pointing the recovery back through to his matchup. The next defensive examples we have are our give and go, shallow cut, overlap, and fade. And so we're going to do that all from this spot and just kind of talk about the off-ball defenseman and what his decision-making thought process is. It's basically the same in all of them. His objective is to help the ball in double if he can, and if the on-ball defenseman gets beat, he'll probably want to slide. Now, if you're not using near-man tactics and you're sliding from the crease, then he might not be that player who slides, but as long as it falls into your defense, you'll be good to go. So let's say that M2 decides to dodge down the alley towards A1. If A1 shallow cuts underneath, D2 is going to have to evaluate whether or not he needs to slide, and we will need to get a backside player to rotate to A2 if D2 does slide. In this clip, we're going to get the same look twice. In our first example, we get a nice shallow cut here. The defenseman shows, then gets back to his man. Now, as Townsend continues to play, the ball will end up getting up top to the same exact position. And then on this shallow cut, the defenseman decides to slide, and we get this three-man rotation between the on-ball defenseman, the shallow cut player defenseman, and a defenseman on the crease. This is a perfect example of why we want to slide to a shallow cut, not switch from a shallow cut, because there's no way that the player on ball is going to have time to get back to the player who shallow cut. If A2 decides to overlap, where he's going to stay on the outside of M2, then we are going to be in a scenario where if we can double with DM1, we're going to want to double with DM1. Now, you have to be conscious of the flip or fake flip, but as long as you talk through it and you see the play, one thing that can really disrupt the flip or fake flip is jumping it. So if that's something that your team is good at doing, that's something I definitely recommend here. But the bottom line is he can double the ball because he's still in a good off-ball position to play A2 if A2 overlaps. For the most part, at the collegiate level, you're not going to be able to double because of how fast the players are moving. But at the youth and high school levels, if an off-ball player ever is outside of the ball carrier, having free doubles is a great thing to put in. In our first clip, Yale does a great job of seeing the overlaps coming, getting skinny as the overlap happens, and maintaining their matchups through the overlaps and flips. In this next clip, Hopkins does a relatively decent job of playing this fake flip, but the on-ball defense isn't sufficient, so the Penn State player can turn the corner and score. Had this player's individual defense been better or drawn a slide, they may not have scored. Another thing we may have happen, and I think M2 would probably be further up in his dodge if he does it, is just his cut or the give and go. So let's say A2 had passed to M2, and now M2 is kind of dodging. If A2 cuts, D2 is going to have to cover the cut. Now, if the cut happens from backside, it's the exact same idea. If you are hot and you have to slide, you may have to slide. But if you're off ball and you're covering to backside, you're going to have to cover the cut. And sometimes that's difficult to do because you might be in a 2 scenario, but your objective is to make sure that you are not allowing for the ball carrier and the off-ball player to connect to throw that pass, whether the cut comes from the same side or the backside. In our first clip, the ball carrier passes down and then cuts to the middle, and the defenseman guarding the cutter allows his man to get underneath him and goal side just barely because he's looking for the pick to come. And because the pick doesn't come, his man beats him by a step, gets fed, and then scores. The unpredictability of a two-man game is what makes it so effective. In our next clip, this team is setting up a dodge that they would like to attack, and this defenseman gets pulled to the middle of the field, and he becomes the sliding defenseman. As he is moving into the middle of the field, and once he gets to the middle of the field, his job is to evaluate whether or not he will be sliding. Notice how you can see him showing here, then back, showing, then back, then he decides to slide, and by that time, the defensemen behind him are there, and they check sticks. Our final example is of a slide and recovery situation where an off-ball player cuts through because the defenseman backside is 2. Notice how these two defensemen are guarding 3 as the ball is thrown inside. Both defensive players stay inside with the cutters rather than playing the players outside who have much more difficult feeds. Now the final two-man without a pick is our fade, and so if we are in an open set where we know that we are sliding adjacent, or if, say, it was the beat over the top example, which I did for the offense, as this fade is happening, D2 is going to want to stay with his man and evaluate whether or not he needs to slide. So if M2 beats him clean and gets in underneath, we may have to slide and force the extra pass that is more difficult than just getting into the middle of the field and scoring. So if you do have to slide, you're going to want to evaluate that. And so the tough part about this is if a dodger is really good at using fakes to kind of keep you towards your man. You're in this decision where you might show, and then if you can show and get back to your guy, that's awesome. And also, if he ends up fading too low where he's out of the play, you can just go, because if he's not dangerous yet, or he has to take 3 or 4 steps to get dangerous, we should have the back end of this rotation ready to account for that player. In our first clip, we're going to show 2 great shows on fades. In the first one, see how this player kind of just stays in the lane but also has the ability to go out and play his man? That's a great show. Now as this plays out and the ball swings around, notice how as this player dodges to the top, once again, this defenseman does a great job kind of showing towards the middle with his stick so that it deters the dodger, but also has the ability to play his player who is fading on the outside. Now if this player comes in a bit, now his decision gets a little bit more difficult, but for this, he did a really good job. In our second clip, as this player dodges underneath on the wing, he immediately draws the short stick slide from X because the player at X can't score, and we should have a rotation in place to cover that. So as he throws the ball to X and the entire defense recovers, they're just a little bit slow recovering and they give up a goal. But the idea here of sliding from a player who is at X and therefore not dangerous is not a bad idea because it gives us more time to read the play. play. In this clip, as this player sweeps across the top, notice how this player is now defending the fade. Notice how he looks to his own man, then back to the ball carrier, then back to his own man to evaluate whether or not he needs to go. And once the ball carrier turns inside, he does end up sliding, and the entire defense begins their rotation. Now, once again, here, the recovery wasn't fast enough to get rid of this skip pass, but you get the idea of how you want to evaluate whether or not you're going to slide because of a fade situation, and how the defense needs to know to rotate adjacent afterwards. Now we're going to talk about the on-ball and off-ball defender as it relates to before the pick, during the pick, and then after the pick, depending on kind of what happens within two separate plays. So the first thing is we're going to be getting an up pick with both of these groups, right? And so as these players are setting their up picks and the offense is coming off of them, we're going to want to make sure we are doing a couple of different things. The first thing that we want to do is if this on-ball player, if he can push his man off his line and really dictate this matchup, it's going to be very hard for the on-ball player to drive him off of that pick. So the first thing we have from an on-ball perspective is you have to dictate the matchup. Now, in the open field, this can be very difficult if you're playing someone who is just as good as you are, but if you can dictate this matchup, they're not going to be able to pick that matchup. For the most part at the collegiate level, defensive players aren't able to just completely dictate and manhandle their matchup, so you're not going to see this too widely. But if a defensive player can get hands on the offensive player and push them out around the pick, that will happen sometimes. Notice here as this player takes his dodge down the alley and he gets an up pick, the defenseman pushes him out around the pick. This is about as good as it's going to get from a collegiate standpoint, but in many youth and high school games where players aren't as meticulous wanting to dodge off of the picks and the differences in athleticism can be much wider, players are going to be able to press the ball out around these picks. From an off-ball perspective, we are going to want to make sure that we are communicating to the player who is on ball because his only objective is to stop the ball carrier. He shouldn't be thinking about anything else at this point in time. Now, the communication that we want to use is that a pick is coming. So we're going to say pick is coming, and then the side of the player who's defending of the ball that is going to be picked. So this can get a little weird when players use double moves. But so on this side, we're going to be saying pick coming right, because the pick will be coming up and then set on the right side of the defenseman. In this, we're going to say pick coming left because it's going to be on the left side of the defenseman. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow the on-ball defenseman to evaluate how he can get around this pick. And so before the pick is even there, the defenseman who is on ball has to have an understanding of where he is in relation to the goal, because if he can basically step off of his man, move around the pick, and then replay the player on the outside, he should definitely do that. But that's only if it happens outside of the dangerous space. If he hops off and moves around the pick in dangerous space, the player who's coming off is just going to shoot the ball. The other thing that he can do before the pick is actually set is he can drive his player off. So this has to do with the whole dictate idea, is if he can drive his player around the pick, he can do that as well, but it has to be before the pick is set. In our first example, as this team is looking to pick behind, as the player dodges towards the pick, the defenseman guarding the off-ball player has to announce to the on-ball player, pick is coming right, pick is coming right. As they get to the other side and come back the other way, he must yell, pick is coming left, pick is coming left. Now, as the on-ball player hears this, he's going to step off of the ball carrier and come around the pick and the defenseman. And because he is behind the goal, there is no danger in him doing that. And the awareness that he has prior to the pick is what allows them to play through the pick so easily. In our next two clips, we're going to show how where the pick is taking place matters just as much as the communication and ability to get around a pick. So in this clip, as this player receives it and then gets an up pick on the wing, notice how the defensive player comes out around the pick, meaning that the off-ball defenseman did a great job of communicating, but because the pick was set so close to the goal, it allowed the offensive player to turn the corner too close and get a great shot off. In this next clip, we get the exact same scenario. As this player gets ready to dodge off of the pick, the off-ball player communicates well, allowing the on-ball defenseman to get out around the pick, but it's too close to the goal, and this player steps in and rips it from 10 yards. In both of these scenarios, the on-ball defenseman should have pressed the matchup prior to the pick rather than allowing the pick to happen so close to the goal. Even if pressing means the pick works well and we may give up a potential matchup, it's better than just allowing someone to shoot from in too close. The final thing before the pick that has to happen is this defenseman who is coming to set the pick, he needs to make sure that he's getting big in the area that the ball carrier is moving into, and he can actually try and get a nice little slap check to him as the pick is happening. But if he can't get big in that lane, we may be giving up the turn the corner a little bit too easily, not making the offense thing enough to where we're not really doing our job. So before the pick happens, the off-ball player should get big in the space that the ball carrier wants to go, while maintaining his matchup against the player who is setting the pick. Notice how as the off-ball player moves to set the pick, the off-ball defensive player steps out, throws a little slap check to force the offensive player to take a wider angle, which should allow the on-ball defenseman to get around the pick and maintain his angle against the ball carrier. Now, while the pick is happening, and actually a little bit before, we want to make sure that the poles put their sticks directly vertical so that anyone who's trying to move in the space between picks has the ability to do so. It's actually kind of funny. I'm sure some of you have seen the highlights of when a defenseman's stick gets locked between his own body, the player who is running through the pick, and the picker, and it just mows over the player setting the pick. And, you know, it kind of looks hilarious at times because it does look like a huge hit, but it's also something where you're going to have a penalty called. So defensemen need to get their stick up to make sure that players can move through the picks. Now, during the pick, as this is happening, the player who is watching the pick, so the player who is defending the picker, needs to communicate what should happen. It should never be the player who's on ball, because the player on ball can't see the play happen. It's the same idea that coaches have a better view of the play than the players who are actually playing, which is why a lot of times coaches will yell specific hints like through or forward or back or inside or whatever that may be. So the player who's watching the pick has to happen. Now, here's the rule. If there's contact, we switch. If there's not, we get through. No auto switching. Nothing where you're going to automatically take the next guy unless you play a zone, which just don't even get me started on zones at the youth level. But so as you're going, let's say DM1 easily kind of pushes M2 out around this pick. D2 is going to communicate, get through. They're just going to maintain their matchups. Super simple, super easy. What we don't want to have happen is if this pick's not going to do anything, we don't want D2 to start kind of coming out and then allow the slip to happen. In our first clip, we're going to show the difference between an easy get-through scenario and a tough get-through scenario. As this player dodges down the alley, the picker is not in a position where he can set a pick, and so the get-through call is relatively easily, and the off-ball player basically just shows into the alley. Now, as they set up a repick, the off-ball player has to show into space to allow the on-ball player to have time to get through. But because there's no contact on the pick, the defensive player gets through. Now, as the off-ball player shows one last time, it does allow the off-ball player to slip and then draw a slide. But overall, I think it shows the difference between a very easy get-through scenario and a much tougher one. In our next clip, we're going to show a little bit of miscommunication. As this player dodges towards X, the off-ball player shows almost all the way to X, and the on-ball defenseman easily gets through, which puts two players on the ball and no one on the off-ball player, which allows an easy pass to the slipping player who scores. On this other side, if the pick is set really well, where DM2 runs straight into A3's, outside shoulder, and M3 comes off hard, once there's contact here, we're going to have to switch. And so D3 is going to switch to take M3, and then DM2 is responsible for getting back goal side of A3 as A3 tries to slip to the cage. Now, we are talking about two-man games, but the backside of the defense can look at this pick as if it's one person and then pick up the player who gains the advantage after. So whether D3 doesn't switch effectively and M3 beats him, we may have to slide to that. Also, if M3 comes, they switch, and then the ball's fed into A3, we may also have to slide to that as well. The key is that we communicate it. If we can get around the pick early, we do. And then if there is contact, we switch. If there's not, we want to stay with our men. In our first 3 clips, we're going to show good switches, 2 from X, 1 from the wing, and then we're going to show a slide after a pick. In this first clip, this player does a great job of moving inside before moving out to set the pick so the on-ball defenseman doesn't see him coming. He also does a great job of setting the pick where the ball carrier can drive the on-ball defenseman off of him. As this happens, the off-ball defenseman does a great job of communicating that the pick is coming. Then, as he sees contact on the pick, he immediately jumps to the ball carrier, yells switch, so that the original on-ball defenseman knows to turn around and play the player who picked him. In this clip, the offense does a great job of being inside out and moving out to set the pick quickly, and they get a great brush with the outside shoulder of the picking player against the inside shoulder of the on-ball defenseman. The off-ball defenseman does a great job of recognizing that the on-ball defenseman loses a step because of the brush, communicates the switch well, and they switch quickly and efficiently. Our first 2 examples do a great job of showing switches at X, which are not as dangerous as switches on the wings because both players are not in a position where they can score and they must roll perfectly in order to maintain the advantage gained by goal side picking. In this clip, the offensive off-ball player does a great job to set the pick in the area where the ball carrier can drive his defenseman off of him. The off-ball defenseman does a great job of recognizing that contact was made, communicates the switch, and hops out to cross-check the ball carrier. As he does that, his stick does break, which means he has to drop it, and the ball carrier ends up shooting from like 8 yards and scoring. But the thing I want you to notice about this clip specifically is how well the original on-ball defenseman does to maintain his matchup against the player who picked him. Now, regardless of whether or not our team has to switch or stay, if either of the players involved in the pick end up with the ball and an advantage, we are going to have to slide. And as I've mentioned earlier, this slide and recovery system should be a part of our overall defense, not something new because we set picks. In this clip, the defense brings 2 players to the ball instead of using a relatively easy get-through scenario and then throws back to the player who picked, creating an advantage on the right side of the field. Once this advantage is created, the defense is forced to slide adjacent and rotate into the passes and ends up recovering quite well. Now we're going to talk through some of the advanced tactics that we can use if a team is setting picks. And so one of the things that I think every single team should definitely incorporate into how they train picks is doubles. And the cool thing you can do with this is if you're a coach who runs 3VOs, 3V2s, and 3V3s to teach motions and concepts, which I completely advocate, and the video's right here, is you can teach how to double and then create advantages through the double by having a 3v2 picking drill and then a 3v3 picking drill where the defense is forced to double the ball. Now, the best thing is to have each group understand enough to where they can evaluate so the offense doesn't immediately assume the double is coming and then kind of take advantage of the drill, but incorporating doubles is extremely important. If we are going to double, because let's say M2 is a bad decision maker, as A2 comes up to set this pick, we're going to have the same type of communication first, and then we're going to add in some new stuff. So let's say M2 tries to drive him off. The first thing that we want to make sure happens is that DM1 doesn't fall off the double. So as the pick is coming to DM1, DM2 has to yell pick coming left, and then he's going to add in get ready, get ready. Get ready signifies that they are going to try to double. Now, as M2 comes off of this pick, D2 is going to yell to DM1, stay right, because he's on the right side. And then D2 is going to hold up M2's momentum so that DM1 can stay on the right side of him, and then they can sandwich the player. So whoever's coming to the double should hold up the momentum of the player. Whoever is already on it should be the player who's trying to check. It's basically the same idea of when you slide, you want to break down in slow momentum, not try and take the ball away. Because if you try and take the ball away, they're just going to redodge right around you. Now, as with the doubles, you're going to need to make sure that if he does step away and move the ball, you're ready to slide to it. But if you teach it, the backside should be ready for that slide. Now, like doubles during overlaps, doubling during a pick is definitely something that's more difficult at the collegiate level where players are much better than it is at the youth and high school level. Doubling at the youth and high school level can be something that really sets your team apart. In this clip, as this team moves through their picking motion, the defensive team hops out and immediately doubles the ball. They put great pressure on the ball carrier, but he does manage to throw the ball to the player who picked, and the defensive team is ready with their slide and recovery. They recover well, but they get beat with the one-on-one dodge on the opposite side. Here's an extremely cool thing you can do if you want to double behind the goal. I'm going to add in the goalie here. Now, I've got a really cool clip of this, but so if M3 comes to set a pick for A3, and let's say A3 does a double move, he comes this way, and then M3 comes out, he sets the pick on D3. What High Point did here was they actually made it so that they are always going to double in this scenario. So as A3 stepped away from this pick, they immediately doubled it. And then as M3 slipped through, the goalie actually came out and played the player who rolled or the player who didn't have the ball so that they could immediately double the ball with a lot of high pressure. And then as the ball was passed, Troutner, their goalie, was right there ready to play the ball. And this is a really cool tactic that you can definitely use easily if you want to train your goalies to end game double or to use a 10-man ride. There are two aspects of doubling that are extremely important. The first is that you double in a location that is safe, which this absolutely does. And the second is that players are aware that the double is going to happen, so they're able to commit to the double rather than having to think about it. This scenario solves both of those problems, and it's why it's extremely efficient. Notice how as this team is moving to set the pick, the defensive players have absolutely no hesitation as they move to double because they know that the goalie is going to come out to play the player who rolls. This is by far my favorite play of 2019 because it has this double where the goalie gets pulled, caused a turnover, pushes in transition, ball ends up on the floor. We get a great goose to a teammate, and then the ball is fed inside to Asher Nolting, who finishes with this sick behind the back. This is why lacrosse is so fun to watch and play. Another big aspect of this type of double is that the goalie has to commit, just like in a 10-man ride, just like in endgame doubles. Notice how as the offensive team moves to set the pick, the defensemen both commit to the play, and the goalie commits by moving 15 yards out of the cage. The ball carrier dodges off of the double well, pushes to get above GLE, and actually ends up getting a shot off, but the defense did just a good enough job to allow the goalie to get back in the cage and totally rob this player. The final advanced defensive tactic we're going to talk about is playing sides. And so the basic idea of playing sides or bookends is the idea of playing each side of the pick in a zone. So this works really well with off-ball picks inside, where you can basically just position two defensemen on both sides of the pick and pick up whichever player comes that direction. Now, on ball, it's a little bit more difficult because if a pick is set really well inside out, you can't really play sides against it because you have to respect the slip. So the easiest way to understand this is with the goal as a third defenseman and I guess the crease as a third defenseman. So basically as A3 dodges and runs through and is going to come off the pick set by M3, if DM2 sees this happening, he can yell sides before anything even gets close to this pick. Basically, once M3 crosses GLE, he's going to yell sides, and then D3 is going to get to the opposite side that DM2 is on. Now, from here, if A3 turns the corner, DM2 will go play him. Now, obviously, if we want to keep specific matchups, we can't do this, but it will allow so that if M3 comes the other way, D3 will easily be able to pick him up on his side of the goal. Now, the one thing that offenses can use against this is if A3 carries this way and draws DM2 out, if M3 goes the same direction and the ball is thrown into M3 as DM2 comes out too far, that can give you an advantage, but the odds of D3 not having enough time to get over are pretty rare. The other thing that this does give you a lot is hang-ups. So you can definitely hang up your defenseman, but if you're behind the goal, if a team sends a pick behind the goal, you can have a player there and then just hang up the other defenseman to take whoever's not defended by the player who's behind the goal. As far as sides is concerned at the collegiate level, sometimes teams will pick against zones and it will allow you to do sides. But for the most part, whenever an offensive coordinator is trying to attack a zone, they won't use some sort of pick. They will just use backside motion, overloads, and rotations in order to beat the zone. I think that's one of the reasons why I couldn't find a good example of sides, but I'm going to do my best to show you what it would look like with this clip of a player waiting inside as a pick happened at X. Notice that as this player moves to set a pick at X, the player defending him waits above GLE, so that as the pick happens, he will await the player not guarded by the defenseman at X. So as this offensive player runs his man off the pick well and is unguarded by the player at X, the player on the crease will move out to play him, and the defenseman at X will maintain his matchup against the offensive player at X. Now, if we roll it back, sides would be something where as this pick takes place here, this player would be to the left and this player would be to the right, and they would await either player on either side. Now, like I mentioned, if the player comes off of the pick and pushes one direction and is followed by the next player, hopefully this player on this side has enough time to get over to defend that player. For the most part, running sides at X can be very efficient, especially at the high school and youth levels. The other place I want to talk about sides is on the wing here, and I'm going to kind of show you how and why sides doesn't work if you've got inside out picks. So to do that, let's explain how a down pick would work from M2. If M2 comes to set a down pick here and A2 does, say, a double move to come up over it, this will easily allow DM1 to kind of watch, and then D2 can kind of just sit in his space here so that as we get the carry over the pick and the roll from the pick, now we can just pick up both sides. And where you see this a lot is in box lacrosse, where when players are picking on the wings, you don't want to let them underneath easily because then they'll just dive and they'll score. But you also don't want to let them over the top too low because then they're in the middle of the field low. But so what you'd like to do is you'd like to keep them in this middle area where then you can kind of squeeze them. But so you don't see this very often in field because as players are really moving to set picks, if M2 does his job and comes to the inside first and then moves out to set the pick, DM1 is not going to be able to hop to this side without giving M2 an easy lane to slip to the goal. Thanks for taking the time to watch this entire video. I really appreciate it. Definitely let me know what you guys thought down in the comments section, especially if there was something that I missed or something that you really enjoyed. Also, if there's something that was in this video that you think someone else would benefit from, make sure to share that with them, whether that's Facebook or through text messages. Also, if you really enjoyed this video and you want to see it printed out, you can download the playbook PDF at patreon.com/POWLAX by clicking the eye up here in the corner, and then one of the links that has the PDF icon on it. You can get that PDF by becoming a patron on patreon.com/POWLAX. And what that basically is you pay $5 a month, you get access to this PDF and all of the others, and you're basically helping to contribute to the creation of all of these free videos on YouTube, as well as all the stuff that I'm going to be doing in the future. So I really appreciate you if you do that, as well as all the other patrons who have supported me over the last, I think, year and a half. Finally, make sure to follow POWLAX and POWLAX Master Coach on Facebook and Instagram. If you are there on Facebook and Instagram or on YouTube, I'll be doing the live streams on Wednesdays. If you have any questions or topics that you would like me to address in those live streams, you can write those down in the comment section, or you can hit me up on Facebook and Instagram as well. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Have a good one. I will see you in the next video.